Please welcome CEO and co-founder, CrowdStrike, George Kurtz.
All right. Well, RSAC 2024, I have to say, I am delighted to be here and see this audience, and I demand we're going to have some fun today. And it's going to start with a selfie, if you don't mind, because I like to do selfies at these keynotes just so that I can remember them. So I'm going to try to get my camera up here, and I'll tell you a story about that here in a minute. I'm going to turn it over. I hate turning my back to the audience, but I do want to get the audience there. Big on 3 RSAC 2024. 1, 2, 3. RSA 20. There we go. Okay. Now, I will tell you the story about that. I'm not a big selfie guy, but I was at the Miami Grand Prix 2 years ago and ran into Michael Strahan, who is a very famous football player with the New York Giants, who I happened to follow when I was a kid and grew up and still follow them. So I went up to him, and again, I don't do too many selfies with folks, and I said, hey, can I get a selfie? And he goes, yeah, sure. So I take out my phone, and I'm literally fiddling with it. It's on the wrong app. It's facing the wrong way. And he just takes the phone. He felt so bad for me. Takes the picture, and he goes, you must be a dad. And I go, yeah, I am. I'm a dad. Like, no idea what I was doing. Okay, so we're here to have fun, and part of having fun for me is stopping breaches. So as I've always said, you know, my mission and CrowdStrike's mission is stopping breaches. And I know I share a common view and mission with many of the folks in the room, but it continues to get harder and harder for defenders each day. Now, you may be wondering what this number and this time is on the presentation here. It's 2 minutes and 7 seconds. And really what that is the fastest breakout time that we have seen at CrowdStrike over the last year. And what it means is that an adversary focused on getting into a system is always going to try to break out and move laterally. And the fastest we've seen, the average is about 79 minutes. The fastest is 2 minutes and 7 seconds. Incredibly fast in today's environment. Now the next number up is 31 seconds. And this is how long it took an adversary to download their toolkit and start running reconnaissance tools, and again, trying to exploit that system. So we know one of the real challenges in security is time, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we try to bend time in security. Now, one of the main problems, and in my view, one of the main problem in security is a data problem. And it's one of the reasons why I started CrowdStrike. It's why I created the architecture that we have. And it's incredibly difficult for SOC teams to be able to sort through this massive amount of data and volumes to find threats. And the real problem is that defenders have too much data and not enough time, right? Goes back to that 2 minutes and 7 seconds. So part of this talk, obviously, is let's think about what we can do to solve this. And we're going to go through kind of a little bit of history on SIEM, talk about next-gen SIEM, and then the AI native SOC. So let's just kind of refresh, and we'll talk about 2005 when Gartner termed the coin, when actually Gartner came out with the term SIEM, Security Information Event Management. And really, what does that mean, and what was it designed to do? Well, in 2005, it was designed to take lots of low-fidelity signals and alerts and put them together and try to actually find things that weren't able to be found in the past in the enterprise. And if you remember, I'm probably dating myself a little bit. This is almost my 30th RSA. But if you remember, in those days, it was all about APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats, and it was really hard for organizations to find them. So we had this thing called SIEM. We're going to put all this data together and correlate it and figure out how do we respond to it. Well, the landscape has dramatically changed since 2005, and unfortunately, the SOC has outgrown legacy SIEM. Now, what do I mean by that? One of the big challenges that the SOC has to deal with is what I call the data paradox, the dreaded data paradox. We'll see if this makes sense to the folks in the audience. And it really is the conflicting view between wanting to ingest and store as much data as possible, but balancing that with the cost. Right, so as many of you know, getting data into a SIEM can be a disaster, turning your analysts and data wranglers. And then one of the main problems is that companies and organizations are making decisions based upon financial needs versus security needs. And obviously, we know what happens. So we'll talk a little bit about the data paradox and how we overcome that. The next area is speed. And as many of you may know, I really like speed, like going fast. And the problem in today's environment is that the legacy SIEM has a hard time actually keeping up with the adversaries. 2 minutes, 31 seconds to get the malware kits installed. When you think about data and how much data we actually have to go through, it can take days to ingest data. It can take days to actually get through queries. So if you want to find and investigate an alert, you can't be waiting days, particularly when you're trying to triage an incident. And it all goes back to that concept of how do you bend time and how do you actually move faster than the adversary. And the last and most important is it fails to stop the breach. Many of the breaches that you've read about, maybe you've been part of, you've seen, probably had a SIEM, legacy SIEM, and it didn't necessarily stop the breach, right? So when we think about SIEM, when we go back, it was, again, first used to get fidelity, low fidelity signals into the system, but then you needed to take action, right? So the industry came up with, well, let's bolt a SOAR, an orchestration platform, onto a SIEM, and we'll take action that way. The problem with that is that the SOAR and SIEM is really out of band. It's over there. You're shipping data and you're making decisions not really at the tip of the spear of where these breaches happen, which are really around endpoints and workloads. So it becomes harder and harder to react very quickly and take action when you're out of band versus in line. So what is Next-Gen SIEM? We hear a lot about it. I'm sure you hear a lot about it at this talk. Obviously, you're going to hear AI all over the place. And I won't disappoint you because we're going to talk about that as well. But when we think about Next-Gen SIEM, it is really integrated into your security platform. I won't go into what a security platform is. We'll leave that for another debate. But it lives where your SOC actually does the work. And this is how we actually solve the data paradox, because what we see now is that many organizations are using tools and platforms like EDR, where they're doing a lot of triage and work, and then they've got to ship it out and do something else with it. And that becomes costly, moving data in and out of the platform, and expensive. The next area of Next-Gen SIEM is really fusing data and AI automation. And this is really going to fundamentally change how we actually operate in the SOC. So what does this actually look like? And it sort of starts with changing maybe the understanding of how to actually get data at scale and do something with it. So as you might imagine, from the world that I come from, endpoint and cloud data is really important, and the view that we take at CrowdStrike is that that's sort of like the most important data to many customers. And what we find, and when we talk to customers, is that they say 85% of what they put in the SIEM actually comes out of their endpoints and their EDR tools. So it's like, well, why stick it somewhere else when you can take the 15% and enrich it and then go from there? So endpoint and cloud data for us is the starting point. But then it's about third-party ingest. There's a lot of other things in the universe that you want to look at, security-related and non-security related, but you want to ingest that data. The problem is it becomes really hard to ingest data because you have parsers and you have to actually get through all these configuration and changes, and it's actually a disaster to move data from one place to another. More importantly, it's hard to normalize this. So when we think about AI and what it can do in this environment, a big part of the solution is having AI actually understand what the data is, be able to ingest it and parse it automatically, and then normalize it. And this is one of the challenges in security that we have today, is that each schema from each vendor is a little bit different. So if you're working with a whole bunch of different vendors, we all call things different names. It looks like an IP address, it smells like an IP address, but we don't call it that, we call it something else. So a big part of Next-Gen SIEM will be able to automatically ingest data without knowing the schema and then normalize that, which is then going to really set up all the other components. The next piece is data enrichment. You have all this data, well, you need to enrich it, right? You want to understand what these alerts are, you want to enrich it, and you want to turn alerts into incidents. And think about how much time is spent by an analyst trying to figure out if the alert is real or not, and actually does it pertain to an incident. Once you have that, then it goes into, well, what's the workflow? How do you take action? And this is a key piece of the Next-Gen SIEM, is to be able to create generative workflows where you're really interrogating the data as opposed to, and asking it questions as opposed to clicking around and triaging through a UI. Obviously, that's going to be around for a long time, but the whole idea is ask questions, get answers. And then the last piece of this is bring your own LLM. If you have all this data in one spot, why ship it off to some other data lake and try to process it and kind of make your own machine learning models and your AI models, right? So if you can do that on the data that you already have, we think that is very cost effective and a way to kind of break this data paradox. The other piece is automated log generation. So you have all this data, right? We've got the data paradox, which is we want to store it all, but it's too expensive. From a next-gen SIEM perspective, it should automate the log management routines. It should actually age out the data. It should store what's relevant, and it should always allow you to get back to and search for what you need over a period of time based upon your compliance needs. So the key piece, though, is that the next-gen SIEM needs to break the cost productivity curve. Now, what do I mean by that? If we think about legacy SIEM, it's a linear curve of using it, but it's an exponential curve of actually paying for it. And I've talked to countless customers that say, we want to ingest data, we ingest data, the more we use it, the bill goes up exponentially. So part of that is breaking this curve and thinking about next-gen SIEM a little bit like your cell phone. Again, I'm old enough to remember when I had like 100 minutes, then I got 200 minutes, then I got 500, and then I got an unlimited plan. I was like, wow, this is so great. I didn't think about having to call my mom, and I'd have to wait till the weekend to call her. I just called her. And here's the problem in security. We make too many decisions saying, I like that data, I want that data, but I can't ingest it, it's too expensive. So cost really becomes more of a stair-step approach as opposed to an exponential spend. The next element is compliance reporting. And I would imagine this is a huge driver and a huge pain point for many folks in the audience. Now, what do I mean by that? How many times have you been asked to, well, we've got a PCI audit, we need to take all these machines and we need to report, are they compliant? We have HIPAA requirements, we need to report on those systems over there. We have a NIST control framework, we need to actually report on that. It's incredible what you can do with generative AI and the ability to say, all this rich data, please report this data in the format that I need, which is PCI, NIST, et cetera. Think about how much time that actually cuts out of your day. Just mapping all these frameworks is a disaster. So this is one of the areas that I'm really excited about. And then the next-gen SIEM really becomes the operating system of the AI native SOC. And you're going to hear a lot about SOC transformations and what it means and moving from kind of the traditional SOC and kind of workflows into the AI native SOC. But ultimately, it's about creating a foundational orchestration layer that not only can support multiple security use cases, but allows organizations to build their own applications on top of it and really becomes the foundational element of a SOC transformation. So the question then becomes, what is an AI native SOC? Well, let's go through a few areas and attributes that I feel are important. First, it has to have advanced threat detection and automated response. This is like a prerequisite. I started the talk with, why are we here? We're here to stop breaches, right? That's the mission. That's why we're here. If we're spending money on this stuff, we have an outcome that we want, which is stopping breaches. It's going to analyze lots of data in real time, and it's going to detect really complex intricate sort of dependencies to come up with threats that have never been seen before, and also find things like 0 days. And it will drive an automated response, right? Isolating a system, taking it offline, patching, remediating, those sort of things. So the whole idea is, how do you compress and bend time in security? And this is one of the key ways. The second area then is predictive security. Think about probably just using things like ChatGPT and Gemini and others, right, is the fact that you can ask it all kinds of questions and it comes back with really interesting answers. But one of the ones that I'm excited about, one of the things that we've been working on, is predictive security. Where are the attack paths? Based upon the threat environment, the threat actors, my assets, my vulnerabilities, my configurations, where are the potential attack paths and what does that graph look like? And that becomes really interesting when you think about how you prioritize what to be fixed, right? Because in security, it's about, you know, all the bad things that can happen, and then when you push it over to the IT teams, they care about what? Tickets, how fast can I close it, you know, and what do I need to patch, right? So there's always a priority that has to go around that. Next is workflow automation. I touched on this a little bit earlier. Think about coming in to work and instead of like clicking around for 8 hours and doing a lot of kind of mundane tasks, you start to interrogate your next-gen SIEM and SOC capabilities. You know, where are the threats in my environment? How does it actually apply to my industry? How does it apply to me as in my company? What are the assets at risk? What are vulnerable? By the way, the vulnerable systems create a PowerShell script and deploy that PowerShell script. These are things that are happening today, right? When we think about how fast the adversary is moving and how they're using generative AI, you know what they're going to be doing on the other side? They're going to be taking the Microsoft patch, automatically disassembling it, automatically creating exploits for it, automatically putting it into an exploit kit, and then putting it back on the gray market. And you're going to shrink that time from a couple of days to a couple of hours. That's why it's important to have this level of automation. And then the adaptive security posture, right? The AI native SOC is self-learning, right? This is a big area. As a company, you have a lot of learnings, right? About your people, about your threats, about your own environment. You shouldn't just depend on, you know, vendors to do that for you, right? The system should actually learn about what a malicious insider looks like in your organization. It should learn about the threats you deal with and how they're exploited. And it's part of the adaptive retraining of the system as time goes on. And then contextual security intelligence. It gives you situational awareness, right? AI is going to contextualize what you found. And again, turn all these various alerts into incidents, because from a defender's perspective and a SOC operation perspective, it really is about tying sort of these unknown, maybe low signals together and creating an incident and an insight that's never been seen before. This, I think, is one of the areas that is really, really important to SOC analysts and defenders. The more context you have, the better you can protect yourself. I was talking to a customer just last week, and they said, hey, there was this kind of low fidelity alert, and it was really weird. And the SOC, and it was one that the SOC analyst typically was a false positive, but they ran it to ground, and they basically said, well, wait a minute, where else have we seen this? What's the context? Where are the IP addresses? Who's behind it? Where are the users? They're asleep. I mean, they went through a whole bunch of things. That was all adding context. They had to do it themselves, and it was all manual, but they did, and they literally were able to contain this adversary within a 10-minute window. And had it not been contained, had that one SOC analyst had not gone through this arduous process of trying to put context to it, they would have had a real problem. So deeper insights into why it happened, what the cause is, and what the potential impact. So putting all this together and wrapping it up, when we think about the next-gen SIEM and the next AI native SOC, it's really about the core operating system of the SOC, and it drives the convergence of people, workflow automation, data, and artificial intelligence. And if you haven't seen some of this stuff and you haven't actually played with it, it's incredibly powerful. I've been doing this for a long time, and I really think it has the ability to revolutionize security, but more importantly, the operations of security. And I do get asked a lot, well, does that mean, you know, SOC analysts are going to be out of business? No. You know what it means? It means that you can take tier 1 analysts and turn them into tier 3. You can take the 8 hours of mundane work and turn it into 10 minutes. You can take that situational report, the sit reps that you have to put together that take a lot of time, you can make them better and you can do it faster, right? And I think, in my opinion, the only SOC analysts that are going to be out of business are the ones that don't actually embrace AI. Because AI is not going to do all of this. You're still going to need people to fly the planes. We're not there yet. But what I would say is, think about it, embrace it. I'm sure many of you are. But for me, you know, it's a beacon of light in security, because every time we come to an RSA, we talk about threats and attacks and how things get worse. And I think finally we've got some good news in terms of helping the SOC have a little bit more fun and putting some rigor and process into stopping breaches. And that is the outcome that ultimately we're here for, stop the breach. So with that, I want to thank everyone for the time and attention. I know you had to get up early to get here. Hopefully you're not too hungover from last night. And we do have another keynote tomorrow, which is the ever-popular Hacking Exposed. So Mike Sentonas and I will be doing that. So hopefully we'll see you there. We can take some more selfies. Be safe, stay secure, and thank you so much for your time and attention. Have a wonderful conference. Thank you so much.